and posted it for us, so thank you, Joel. And with that, I'm just going to turn it over to our city manager to take it from here.
Good morning. Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners.
Good morning.
Morning.
Glad to be back in the saddle and working on our strategic plan today. Had the benefit of sharing with some of you from our last conversations in December some of the update that was very, very valuable, and I don't take it for granted that this is a significant amount of time out of your schedules. For some of the discussions, we are discussing the obvious, but for some other portions of discussions, we are going beyond the obvious and getting further clarity on the direction of our community, the direction of the organization, and making sure that we are aligned with your priorities, and that I am aligned and I can further align the organization. And so I want to thank you again for making this sacrifice. I want to acknowledge today the presence of our consultant, again, Scott Patton from Plant Moran, and what we have designated our project leader, Allison, and we'll have a host of project team members here that have been working on this. We have over 40-plus employees who have been engaged in this planning process as part of the team to help engage the rest of the organization, so it is very, very inclusive. So if we will, I'd like to, if we can go to the first slide on the agenda, we'll talk a little bit about the feedback that you've shared at the last session and the framework that I had a chance to visit with some of you about. We'll talk a little bit more, making sure there's clarity. I'm looking forward to sharing some of the feedback that I've had in the town hall meetings with the employees around our values as an organization. And I've had the chance to engage over 1,000 employees and having discussions with them and with you, and we think these are consistent with the values that our community would want us to have as an organization. And today we're going to go a lot deeper in talking about not just the priority areas, but some of the outcomes and objectives that we would like to see. And this is a plan in progress, and we're moving pretty fast. I'm often reminded by my staff is it's not the speed of light, but it is pretty close. What we're trying to put together in a relatively short amount of time to help us inform our budget deliberations and priorities as they're upcoming. And then we hope to wrap up today before lunch. Again, this is a continuation of the thought from the last meeting. What I hope to commit to you today is that I don't think it will require a future special work session. I think the remaining work we'll attempt to accomplish on your regular commission meetings if we make enough progress today. So again, my thanks to the staff and all the people that are here, our partners in the room, and as well as our consultant for the work that they have done today. Anything else? Okay. So with that, I want to turn it over to Scott.
All right, thank you. It's a pleasure to be back. I haven't been here since meeting with you about 6 weeks ago. I want to share a little bit of the progress that has been made as it relates to strategic planning. You're familiar, but perhaps for the benefit of the public a little bit as well. So when we had the session in early December, it was almost like starting from a blank slate. Not quite, but frankly, the commission could have chosen to take the city in just about any direction. And if you don't have direction, it's hard to accomplish things. So what the commissioners gave at that point was good feedback for the organization in terms of strategic direction. And that included, that good conversation around vision, some strategic priority conversation as well. And in addition, one of the key concepts that need to, or I want to remind how important it is just establishing a strategic planning framework. Allison will go over that in a little bit, but that framework is something that includes things like a common terminology, how alignment's going to occur, the basic infrastructure that helps make sure that that priorities end up getting implemented. And the fact that it's been accomplished in very, very short time, I just think is quite an admirable feat. Yeah, feet. So since then, the executive team has met several times. Department heads, we had a good meeting with department heads where we shared what the direction that commissioners had. There's good discussion. They digested that information, synthesized it, shifted, reworded some things that they think could be beneficial, and so part of that will be shared with you today. In addition to that, sort of behind the scenes, outcome teams have been identified. Now, this is another very important step for making sure that the objectives, the direction that commissioners want to take the city end up getting implemented. You have, one of the things that we've discovered is that there's an awful lot of talent within the organization. And so, those priorities will be accomplished if they get assigned and to groups, and that it gets aligned with the operations of the organization. So that's again something that's very, very significant, and I want to highlight that as a very large accomplishment for the city. So those things we will discuss later, and we'll delve into those 6 strategic priorities. Over that time, my role, it kind of went from one of being a facilitator to help guide discussions, help guide the strategic planning process, more into one of an advisor. So the city's really taken over an awful lot of the strategic planning, which is a very healthy, very good thing for the city. And Allison especially has just taken the bull by the horns and done an excellent job, from my perspective, of helping to push in the right direction and making sure that everything aligns well. So having said that, I will facilitate a part of today's session, and during that time, it'll be similar rules to what we had last time. I need to make sure that the conversation moves along, so there may be times when I'll ask for commissioners to hold comment for a later point, but the objective is to make sure that you get through the topics that need to happen. We have the 6 different strategic priorities. We need to confirm those. We need to talk a little bit about the objectives, and get the guidance from commission to make sure that things are aligned with what your priorities are for it. So that's kind of how far things have come. Again, it has been an awful lot that has been accomplished, and kudos to commissioners for giving good guidance, good direction, and kudos to the organization for reacting in a very positive way for it too. Now, Allison, the strategic planning model that I mentioned, Allison will walk us through part of that.
Great. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Mark. I'm going to stand for a minute and just wanted to say good morning to commissioners and to all the staff that are here today. Really appreciate everyone's support. And I just want to reiterate that this has been a very large team effort and a large team event that we've been working since the last commission workshop in early December. So in particular, I just wanted to highlight a few of those teams now, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the other teams later. But in particular, there's an executive team that Mark helped establish for purposes of helping with the strategic plan. And so our executive team members are seated at the table over here that you can see, but with Chief Lehman, Eric DeLong, John Globinski, Becky Jo Glover, Desiree Foster, and Jeff Dode are sitting on that and helping to advise from the executive perspective. And Brad Brown and Alex Melton are also sitting at the table, and they have been just extremely key partners that have been working with me on a bulk of the information that we're going to share today. So I really want to take a moment to acknowledge the work that they've been doing. Brad, I think, as you know, has a lot of experience around strategic planning, and that's been extremely helpful. And Alex has a great creative mind and has been doing wonderful things in terms of helping to visualize the work that we've been doing, which is really key. So I do really want to acknowledge that when you see fantastic visuals on the slides above, that's really due to Alex's great work. And Scott has been a phenomenal partner as well and has really been stepping in to help continue to steer us and be a fantastic partner for us on this journey. So actually with that, the next slide that we have and part of the agenda is just to do a quick review of kind of a framework to help everybody continue to use the same terminology. And when we're referencing different components of what's been developed in the draft strategic plan, that we're all working from the same context. And so with that, I'm going to invite Brad to come up and really help kind of just highlight the framework and where that fits in.
I normally don't need a mic, so I'll try to keep my volume down as we go through this. So the importance of this framework cannot be overstated. Planning is tricky. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of things way off in the distant future. How does this all kind of fold in together with what we're already doing? This framework, this picture right here, is worth truly 1,000 words. So I think where we start is, how does strategic planning fold into what we're already doing? We have a master plan that's going to be updated in the near future. That's going to have a lot of community input. That's going to set us up for the next 20 to 30 years. Very long-range projects, very big things. How do you get there? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? So we have to take this 30-year plan and break it down into a more manageable, actionable thing that we can actually do something with, and that's the strategic plan. Many of the things identified in that master plan will be broken down into various iterations of the strategic plan. And that's one thing we have to realize. This is our first shot at a citywide strategic plan. We will not accomplish everything we want to this first time out. But understand, this plan is a living and breathing document. It will be updated on a frequent basis, and we're only going 3 to 5 years out in the future. Next time, we're going to reset, scan the environment, see how things are going, and we can go in a little bit different direction, okay? Planning is an orientation, not a destination. And that's what we have to keep in mind as we're working through this. We're not going to get it right the first time, but that's okay. Now, how does this play in with our fiscal plan? So many of us, actually every one of us in this room, is probably involved in the budget process. And we do take those 5-year snapshots in the budget, especially our big capital projects, right? We're looking out, we're thinking about this, we're thinking about bond capacity and all these different things. Right now, many of us are right in the throes of our annual budget process. We're crunching numbers, we're getting ready for January 25th at 5 p.m., I believe, and we're trying to get that established. In the future, that will line up with our strategic plan. Right now, we're kind of doing this at the same time. Fiscal, strategic planning, master planning, it's all converging. But once we get this cycle going, it is a cycle. The fiscal will go directly into the strategic will go up to the master. All these plans cascade down, and they all nest within each other. That is true alignment, and I think the city is setting themselves up to essentially make sure where we're spending our dollars, where we're allocating our resources, lines up with what the commission, management, and the citizens said where we need to go. Now, I want to get into kind of some of the terms here. I've worked with many great men and women over the years here in the city, and I can tell you that we are a values-driven organization. A lot of times when people will say mission, vision, values, what does that actually mean? What do those words mean? Well, I can tell you, mission is why we show up every day. That's why we do what we do. Vision, that's really where we want to go. That's a little more aspirational. Values, that's how we get the work done. That's how we make our decisions. That's how commission makes decisions. You may not realize it, but our managers and our department heads are living their values through their actions each day. And what the city manager is asking us to do is take that up a notch. Become a true values-based organization, not so much a rules-based organization. When it comes down to a programmatic decision, we have to go back and say, how is this impacting our values? Are we honest? Are we using integrity? Is this true excellence? Does this decision align with excellence? And that's a question that we're going to be asking ourselves on a daily basis as we live our values. Now, once these are all set, we have to have a little more direction. We call them pillars, some people call them buckets, other places will call them strategic priorities. But we have a million things going in this city. This city is rocking, and it's awesome. but we have so much work to do, we have to kind of narrow that down a little bit. So for us, we're going to be calling those strategic priorities. These are still those long-range things that we want to accomplish, but they're going to be in areas such as safe community. There are many different departments and facets to being a safe community. It's not just police and fire. And so all those are going to fold in, and that team is going to work together to try to make a safer community on those 3 to 5 year items that we're going to be working on. We go down a little further. So aspirational, we're getting down into things we can actually start to do now. These are our objectives. What do I want to achieve this year in safe community? We go down a little further and we get down into strategies and metrics. Now the rubber's hitting the road. Now there's things that we can measure. Now we know if we're actually turning that box green. And so I didn't want to mess it up, but I had something I wanted to read here. Sir Winston Churchill, however beautiful the strategy, you should occasionally look at the results. We're going to make a beautiful plan, guys. The plan is going to be awesome. At some point, we're going to get down into deployment and annual performance reporting. That's where we're going to see how we're doing. That's where we're going to take those quarterly and 6-month snapshots internally. That's where annually we're going to come back to the commission and go, here's our report card. The plan said we were going to do this. Here's how we're actually doing. And we're going to be able to talk about those things. And finally, it goes all the way down into staff performance evaluations. How is our work each day making this city better? How are we aligning my job, the chief's job, anyone's job in here to the strategies that we said were important? So when you take that step back, we have a lot of things going on this framework. All I can say is keep this page handy. We're going to use it a lot. And Alex, thank you for making this. And Allison, thank you for steering this one-page synopsis. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Brad. So I really appreciate, like I said, Brad's expertise and experience in this area and how he can help frame that and has been driving kind of systematic framing for the strategic planning. So just a couple points that I want to highlight. So today, as you saw on the agenda, we're really going to start with the conversation on the values, and Mark's going to kick that off. Then we're going to move into some conversation to follow up with what you talked about in terms of vision statements from your December workshop. And then after that, we're going to get into really the bulk of what today's session is going to be about, reviewing the strategic priorities, some draft outcomes that we have developed that we want your feedback on, as well as those objectives. And so that's how the session is going to lay out today. But I really wanted to reiterate his point, and I think this is one that really Mark has helped to continually make us think about. We don't want to just create a plan that will sit on the shelf. And so that's why these last two parts that Brad just talked about are extremely important, right? Being accountable for success that we will be achieving in areas where we need to continue to improve under the plan, embedding performance management into our organization as we move forward so that we really are holding ourselves accountable and sticking to what is in the plan and allowing that plan to drive our fiscal plan as we get into the proper cadence moving forward. So one other item that he mentioned, and just keep in your mind, and we did this as staff, always asking when we're talking about the objectives, can we do this in 3 to 5 years? That's what we have to be focused on for this plan in terms of ensuring that it's one that can be successfully implemented. So any questions on just kind of the framework for today before we jump into the conversation around values? Okay, well, I'm actually going to turn it over to Mark now to kick off the conversation on values.
Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, I've been having these conversations around being a value-based organization since I've started, and I've had 22 meetings. The staff has helped to schedule those throughout the workplace, and some of the meetings have been as early as 5:30 in the morning at the police department's roll call, and some have been evening meetings. I think I have one left, and that is at the Lake Michigan filtration plant, and that is tomorrow, I believe, tomorrow morning at 7:30. Probably wonder why we schedule these so early, but tomorrow morning, yes. How far is that away? 45 minutes? Oh, boy. All right, tomorrow morning, 7:30, nevertheless. And so I've been pretty consistent in talking about these values and the importance of it because, as Scott said earlier, it defines who we are. And they're not just words on paper for me. They're a contract. They're a contract with our organization, contract with our public. It's not only who we are, it's a reflection of who I am, and I believe the tone begins at the top. And for people on our leadership team, for anyone to have behavior that is inconsistent with the values, is an opportunity for development. If it's something that, we all need development, there will be development. But if it is anyone that does anything intentionally and willfully and negligently to be inconsistent with the values that we have as an organization, I do not have any tolerance for that kind of behavior. I expect not only for us to have these values so we can call each other out, I expect to have these values as well so I can likewise be called out, and I want these to mean something not only for our organization but for me as well. So these are very important. And so I'll just share with you a few of the things we've been discussing, and they've been filtered and refined by the team even further. So these are things that I've been consistently talking about: accountability, to make sure we do what we say we're going to do in the manner in which we promise it. And you can see from the highly scientific emoji survey there that when we ask employees, when in each meeting, and the values were on the wall, and they were asked to tell us what they see us doing well and what we see us not doing well, and if there's a lack of clarity around what it means. And I think what the staff has done is highlighted those values where we had a response over 40% of the people, over the 11,000 people who attended those meetings, which is about 1,100, I'm sorry. People, we haven't added that much to the workforce yet, that have attended those meetings, and about 75% of our workforce. And so what it shows is that, there's room for improvement in all the areas, and we will get better at that as an organization, but we definitely have to be accountable. I do believe in being collaborative, both within the departments, outside departments, and collaborative with community. I am very serious about customer service, being responsive to the public, and I have told the organization consistently, customer is not always right, but the customer does always deserve to be respected, whether or not that is a person that is the CEO of a company or a homeless person. Everyone deserves to be treated and recognized for their humanity consistently. Diversity, equity, inclusion is consistent with what we have been talking about as a community organization. And that means inclusivity, both certainly as we've been leading conversation about race, but all other areas of differences, but also styles, communication preferences, those other ways to be inclusive of perspective. And innovation, figuring out how to do what we do, particularly with what we have in different ways. And so this organization has been very nimble. I like to use the word nimble because of being resource constrained. Sometimes scarcity creates a culture of innovation. But we want to be more intentional about that moving forward, and to be resilient and sustainable, not only in the areas of environmentalism and reducing our carbon footprint and greenhouse gas, the effects of greenhouse gas emissions, but also sustainable moving forward long-term, making sure that what we do lasts beyond the initial moment or the initial year, so more long-term. And finally, being transparent. I think that is the way that we continue to improve our trust and credibility with the public. I think this organization, this commission is very transparent, and we want to continue to promote those values within the organization. And so I think this was at a high level what we discussed. If you go to the next slide, Speaking of innovation. Well, if you look at the next slide on your handout, how's that? Is that it? Do I have the right one? Okay. Draft values. Okay. Next slide on your handout. What we've heard is, all those are important, but in order for it to be embedded in the minds of our employees, it has to be, we have to simplify it in ways that people can remember. And so we have to reduce the number of values, but make sure we're clear about the meaning. And so these are the 6 values. We have draft values so far, 6. And we have 6 values, 6 priorities, and so I can't remember the number of objectives. Is it
28.
28 so far. So I will ask Allison just to walk us through our draft values in terms of not only what they are, but the meaning of how we defined it.
Well, thank you for framing that up, Mark. I think it's been fantastic that he started this journey around values and has really gotten a lot of the staff and management engaged and enthusiastic. And just to reiterate a couple of comments that have been made, that the values are really something that we carry core to us as staff and how we accomplish our work. And the idea for values are that they are embedded throughout all of the strategic priorities, throughout all of our objectives and what we work on. These are constantly part of the work that we do, and that we're coming back to these to continue to reflect, to ensure that we are holding true to these throughout all of the work that we do across our governmental organization. And so when you talk about equity, we're talking about equity regardless of if it's in this department versus this department or objective number 12. Equity is always seen as a component of the strategic plan, and the same can be said for the other values that we have on the board here. And so this really started got a lot of staff feedback in addition to the feedback that the commission gave in December. And so our efforts to come up with a draft list of values, and these are some descriptions that I put together that I can read, and then really would just like to open it up for some feedback for you. These are not etched in stone in terms of the descriptors. It was more just to help kind of the conversation, ensure everybody's working from the same baseline around what we mean when we say some of these terms. And we put them in alphabetical order, and I know Mark is working very hard to see if we can come up with an acronym to make these memorable so that the staff and commission and those in the community, so we talk about ACES right now, but we might be trying to find a different acronym to really help bring these to life for staff. But accountability, he's talked about that, right? Acting with integrity, with transparency, and ensuring that we're responsible for what it is that we're doing, internally and to the community as well. Collaboration, of course, working in partnership. I know partnership and partner was a key term that came up a lot in the December session that we had, really being about a team-based approach. And I just want to take a minute to pause there, because as we go through the strategic priorities and the objectives that are under them, they don't sit in one department. It's not, here's this objective and now this department's going to go off and own it and make it work. These are things where are going to require true collaboration across the departments throughout our organization, knowing that the key issues facing our community take collaboration across different departments and services that we're offering. And so it takes a little bit more time to accomplish those, because you have to bring people together in order to address and really live collaboration as a true value. So customer service, right? We're talking about that both in terms of internal customers for departments that serve other departments within the city, as well as customer service that we are offering to those in our community, whether they be residents, businesses, organizations, visitors, tourists that come to our city. And I really liked here, we talk about, providing customer service with excellence and providing it with respect. Those being key components to customer service. And the last part really talking about before, during, and after the customer's requirements are met. So that's really kind of embedding customer service throughout. Equity, we've talked a lot about equity, and I have been in my time here, and I'm going through our real cohort session now, and I am just so impressed with the city's commitment to date to getting our staff trained on equity, and I think that says something about our organization. I think all of you know equity is a long journey. It's not something that we just accomplish tomorrow, but identifying it as a core value is something I think that everyone understands, that it's a key component to how we're doing work, and that we want to continue to have a focus in this area and the importance of addressing disparate impacts in our community. Innovation, right? So trying to think outside of the box, challenging, well, we've been doing it this way for 20 years, right? That kind of mentality, and trying to think differently, particularly with the changing dynamics of our community, different demographics of people coming, different forms of communication, right? Different things that we can be doing with data, right? And really wanting to be data-driven, but needing to be able to use innovative tools and resources to help accomplish that. And he said being nimble and that being a component of being innovative. And then lastly, sustainability, of course, probably one of my favorites, as I'm sure is no surprise. But I like to just call it the definition here because I think oftentimes people say that, and maybe in the community they think that we're just talking about environmental programs, maybe the energy or waste. But really, when I think about defining sustainability, right, the root word sustain is just to ensure that your organization is going on and offering service in the manner that you want. It includes fiscal sustainability, right? So it's just really when we're making decisions, thinking about how does that decision impact not only finances, but the environment and our people in the community. So let's be thoughtful about those impacts when we're making the decisions. And that, to me, is really embedding sustainability in your organization when you're thinking about decision-making and policy. So that is kind of the overview of where we have come with some draft values that we wanted to share with you and really now allow for you to provide some feedback and thoughts on where we are. Yes, Commissioner.
I just have a quick question. When staff was surveyed about the various categories, were we using the draft values or were we just asking them in general? How did they feel about how we're faring with customer service, as an example?
So we did not have this created at the time. This actually was a result of some of the feedback from that. And so we had thought about should we provide some kind of descriptor at that time and actually chose not to, because there's a difference between how do staff perceive the value, right, versus kind of how is it that we're defining.
And then would we go back to them with now these definitions to say, now respond and see if the results are different or not necessarily?
I don't know that, I'm not sure
Okay.
the direction on that, but I'll let Mark speak to that.
So we certainly would go back to create awareness and ownership of, and understanding of the values. And we have some objectives later to talk about employee engagement and measuring satisfaction, culture, climate of our workforce, and we would do that periodically. It wouldn't be right away after we do this, but periodically we'll go back and see how we're doing from a workforce perspective on these values.
Yeah, Commissioner
Yeah,
Kelly?
I don't know if this is on, apparently not. Oh, there it is. Couple things. One, I certainly forgive you if we can't come up with an acronym. This would be challenging. And, yeah, I have. And acronyms can be exclusive anyway because people don't know what we're talking about. So I think that's fine. The other thing that I wanted to say is that I really like starting out this way. Having been a teacher of civics, we talked a lot about core democratic values, and that should be driving our decision-making. And I think values translate into norms, and norms are incredibly important in terms of our behavior all the time. So I really appreciate all the work that all of you have done in this regard, because if we keep coming back to that, I think it helps us explain our positions often as commissioners, and hopefully it drives all of our decision-making. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So I agree with Commissioner Kelly. I think starting with values and holding them dear is where we need to be. So in looking at this language, and again, I appreciate that it's really concise, but I also, and maybe this isn't necessarily that it needs to be added, but I do believe many of these, especially innovation, require an openness to feedback and self-awareness. And, whether that's being accountable or being collaborative. And I don't know if those are words we want to add, but I do think somewhere as we talk about, the kind of organization we want to be, I think all of us have heard feedback from community at times when they feel like government is not open to feedback and that we lack as an organization or as individuals in government a real sense of self-awareness. And that's required for change, in my opinion.
I have a question in reference to equity. In the last part of the sentence, you had how one fares. I need clarity on that. What does that mean?
My understanding, and I'm doing a lot to learn here, but that's in terms of, this is kind of a more standardized way that people have been defining equity. I think it's a little more broadly, and we had some discussion around should it be more defined in a kind of a positive spin in terms of eliminating disparate impacts, but how one fares, how one person fares in terms of when we think about some of the outcomes that have been experienced by communities of color in terms of health outcomes, job employment, and those types, so how one fares in our community.
Let me add, and I think that the intent is that your identity, and if we talk about race, we can begin with racial identity, is not indicative of the disparities that we see in various parts of our community. And so true equity would mean that your race no longer predicts that you're going to be twice as likely to be unemployed as someone else, or your race no longer predicts that you're going to be 3 times as likely to drop out of high school. And so removing those conditions that have those disparate impact ultimately affects equity. And so how one fares, we could certainly be more explicit and talk about how one experiences disparities, for example. And so there's opportunities to enhance the meaning of those, and that's the reason why we wanted that feedback today.
Yeah, because that can open up a can of worms for a lot of different opinions on how one fares, because everybody who sees equity don't necessarily have the same definition of what equity is. So we have to be real careful. When you say how one fares, what does that mean to me? I mean, how do I fare in your environment? How do I fare? I may come out of the same culture you came out of, but you still may see me different. I may have been your next door neighbor. You still may see me different. So how does one fare? I mean, it's kind of broad for me. I don't think you ought to take that completely out. That's like the football game. That bad call. How does one fare on that? My team lost.
We could be more direct and talk about disparities. Yeah.
I wondered if, how one is impacted by policy. I mean, we're talking about city policy and what we do, but maybe that's still too nebulous, how one's
That's
impacted.
narrow. Because people can have disparities that are not necessarily our policy, but they're results of conditions, socioeconomic conditions that exist that our policy alone may not change. And so we might have to help to create policy with other collaborators and people outside of municipal government. But if we want to, but to acknowledge what you said, if we were only focused on what we did on the ninth floor, then that's exactly what it could be. But I think our lens is a little bit broader.
Yeah.
And because that goes back to customer service. Where does customer service fit in with equity? When you have people who are coming for help, and they may feel inadequate because of how you may approach them or what type of service you may give them, or you may not even understand what they're dealing with. They may not even know how to explain themselves in their condition, and sometimes it can be easily misconstrued to a certain degree. So, I mean, I like what we're doing, and I have a motto that you're only as good as your last case, and if you're not good that day, you're no good at all. I mean, so you have to constantly continue to look at how you give services around the entire, what's the right word I want to use, quality. But at the same time, equity is still a part of that. And how do you get past our inconsistencies?
Thank you.
Yep, I like very much the draft values. I think a couple of things come to mind. One is it speaks to our current reputation, but it also is very aspirational. I think that I know that we have worked diligently within City Hall to be known for the customer service that we provide. I think that we are known and for our efforts to be a collaborator. I think it has been a priority around our focus on sustainability. And so I like the fact that we have not gone away from those values that I think have been embedded in our city over the years, while also adding or looking at things through a more aspirational lens. I especially like the inclusion of innovation with our efforts to, again, perhaps change the narrative with regards to the city and the region and how we fare and how we are looked upon as being innovative. I think that word in many ways has been owned by our colleagues in the other cities in the southeastern part of the state. And so I think we need to stand on that, and we need to lift that up in an effort to hopefully use it as a means of challenging those who are operating in that space daily. But I like the fact that we're leading there. I also like the accountability piece. I think we're living in a time in which not only is it an expectation, but it's something that as long as we are, I think, constantly operating with that on top of mind, it's going to be of benefit to us, because that's what we hear on a regular basis from constituents, is this whole idea of accountability. Now, we can take that. Accountability, in my opinion, you can create a working definition, because some folks have a different view or spin on what accountability is. We may feel as if we're being very accountable and being very transparent, but we're also, I think, living in a time in which there's perhaps the mindset that there's conspiracy that surrounds us at all times. So our ability to be fully open and transparent and recognizing that we need to be accountable. So I think we're going in a very, very, very good direction. But I love these. I love all six. So well done.
So I want to ask if anybody else has any comments they would like to share before we shift gears to discuss a couple draft vision statements. All right. Well, thank you for the feedback. I'm excited that they seem to speak to you as well, and appreciate some of the specific feedback you gave. So we'll definitely take that into consideration as we work on drafting kind of a more formal set of values that we can move forward. And I think, Commissioner Lear, to the question you started with as well, as we implement the plan, it will be driven through values as well. So I envision that we'll be having conversations about these values with staff, some trainings that help to support that. When we talk about innovation, what does that mean, and what do we need to ensure that staff are doing to feel like they can be innovative and are supported by innovative services? So it'll very much be a continuing conversation with staff.
Yeah, my question was really just to see if we were going to be able to have baseline data so that after implementation, we could go back and ask the same questions and perhaps see, how far we've come. But now that we've changed things, I think, the data is going to be skewed because they'll be asked different questions, essentially. So that was the only reason I was asking, just to see if there was room to have baseline data from employee feedback.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, we're going to shift gears now, where we started with the values, and then the next part of that pyramid, if you remember, was vision. And so this was where, I know in the first session, Scott went through and worked with you to identify what are some things you think about when you think about what we aspire to be as a city, what we want the city to be in the future. And understanding that a vision statement is something that is aspirational. I think he used the phrase at one point in time, it should make you a little scared that you're not sure if you can achieve it, right? Because we want to be pushing ourselves into what can we become. And so this is a little bit, this is what we used as staff when we worked with top management and our strategic planning teams to really help hone in on the feedback that we heard from the December session. So it's a word cloud. There are 4 levels, if you're wondering, in terms of, and those words that are the largest were the words that were discussed the most often and with the most emphasis from your December work session. And so the 2 that came out meeting that in terms of being spoken about the most with the most emphasis were around health and the conversation broadly about health and how that means a lot of things, mental health, physical health, social health, and thinking about that, as well as this idea of being engaged and collaborative, and partner was a word that came in the second level, so kind of along those lines. And then the second tier I mentioned partner, but were equity, trust, and safe. So that was some of the feedback that we shared with staff to help work through some sessions with staff, taking into consideration your early feedback from that session. And then this was just kind of a bullet point summary of some of the key concepts that came up from your session as well that we shared with staff to just paint a little bit broader of a picture than just the words that were in the word cloud. So I won't go through all of these because you have them all, but there was good conversation right around addressing the disparate impacts and that tying with equity and talking about customer service or innovation and the city really acting as a partner. There was conversation about being welcoming, right? Being more than welcoming and helping to embrace and wanting those in our community to feel like they belong to our community. And then, as I mentioned, kind of health, talking about the mental health, environmental health, lead, and those types of other health items so that it's not so singularly focused in one area of health. And so where we have landed after taking that feedback into consideration and really working with our staff and our cabinet teams are 2 draft vision statements that we wanted to share with you today and get some of your feedback on those vision statements about what parts you like. Is this starting to speak to what you were thinking about when you were thinking, you know, what do I aspire our city to be in the future? And so I'll just read them and then allow you to provide some feedback. The first is Grand Rapids aspires to be welcoming, creative, equitable, aspires to be a welcoming, creative, equitable, and collaborative city with a vibrant economy, safe and healthy community, and the opportunity for a high quality of life for all. And the second draft that was developed is Grand Rapids strives to be a trusted partner that leverages collaboration to create equitable and innovative solutions to community issues that benefit and enhance the health, safety, and economic prosperity of all within our community. So now we welcome your discussion around these vision statements and feedback.
And just to acknowledge, Commissioners, that I think when I shared a draft with you individually, some of you provided feedback. I did not modify any of the statements because everyone had different feedback. So I think this would be a good chance to share collectively what thoughts you might have and see if there's any other thoughts around that feedback.
Well, I'll start if you want. So out of the 2, my personal preference is the first one, only because when I read them side by side, I don't necessarily, I think we need to aspire to be a type of city, and I think draft 1 captures that, where I think the second one, we strive to be a trusted partner. I don't necessarily feel like that captures the kind of city we want to be. So that's it. Like, as I read the 2, the first one resonated. Not that it may need some wordsmithing and additional work, but I like that it's very clear. This is the kind of city we want to be. We want to be welcoming, creative, equitable, collaborative. So that's just my initial response.
That's good. I'll jump in. I actually I hadn't thought about that in those terms, Mayor, so I like that you've made that separation. But I did favor the first bullet. The only input I have is that I didn't feel like it was aspirational enough. So I don't feel uncomfortable with it. And if we're supposed to feel a little bit nervous about whether we can reach the goal, this is something we've been talking about quite frequently and, you know, wouldn't be challenging to reach, I think. So I think there's something about it that needs a little bit more risk or innovation. What's the word in the new values? Let's put those to work right away.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, there are some cities that speaks to their aspirations relative to where they are either nationally or worldwide. And so the example that I was given in Orlando, Disneyland is in Orlando and it has a worldwide reputation. Matter of fact, they call it the World Disney World. It's Disney World, yeah. So even in the name it implies worldwide reputation. Well, the city was sitting there and say, well, why is everyone looking at Disney as a global model of entertainment, but not as Orlando as an international city? So we don't want it just to be Disneyland that has an international reputation. The city itself aspires to be internationally recognized for certain things. And so when we talked about our vision statement, do we want to be recognized comparatively among the Midwest, nationally, and the real stretch is internationally. And there was this sense of, in talking to the leadership team, the sense of humility in not having a national comparative. To be the best in the nation, or to be a national city that is recognized as welcoming and creative, et cetera. I, quite frankly, have no problem seeing ourselves as among the national leaders in communities that have those type of qualities, and I think that would be a good stretch for our organization.
Yeah, and if I could weigh in, I think that frequently we're on national lists.
Right.
And so, because someone nationally is looking at the community regardless, it would be great that if every single list we were on, we were, at the top or in a positive light. And we know that we haven't been on some of those lists. And so I think, we need to consider, at least nationally, that we're being viewed and somehow there's a scorecard of some sort. We're being graded in some way nationally already.
I hadn't heard that, your thoughts on this before, but I like the idea of saying Grand Rapids aspires to be recognized nationally as ...
Blah, blah, blah.
Right. I mean, do we want, and I even think we could add to, I know you don't want to have it be too long, but if we really aspire to be seen as one of the most innovative cities in the country, then I think that needs to be included. And I would actually put equitable first.
Right.
I would say aspires to be equitable, welcoming, and maybe creative is similar to innovative. Although I think creative, people think of arts and culture, which I think we're also very proud of, where I think innovation, people assume different things when they hear innovative versus creative, and they're not always interchangeable.
To that end, I would like to suggest the use of the word innovative in place of creative, for that very reason and more. Again, it's consistent with the values that we have drafted, and again, it's just another opportunity to put it out there in terms of what we aspire to be. Also, would suggest the word dynamic in place of vibrant. Vibrant is something that is used on I think it's overused, and I think the word dynamic adds a different element in terms of describing our aspiration around the economy. Vibrant is, again, if we were to Google it right now, I'm pretty certain, if we were to Google vibrant economy, I'm thinking it's going to be pretty, it's going to be a lot of hits. So just a suggestion. And I would also, to Commissioner Lanier's point, to make it even more aspirational, the thing that I liked about the second bullet was our desire, or how we strive to create solutions to issues. And so that's missing, I think, from the first, is this idea of aspiring and working to create solutions. And it doesn't have to be community, it could just be issues. Because I think when you say community issues, I think people's minds go to certain issues. But if we keep it open to issues that benefit and enhance health, safety, and economic prosperity, there's a lot of issues. But this idea that we're constantly working and striving to create solutions.
So, and that made me think of two things. So to me, when I read the first one, in order to ever reach that goal, we're always going to have to be working on finding solutions and making things better. So I guess for me, I felt that focus on solutions and change was really inherent in the first one, because we know we're not there yet, and the only way we're going to get there is by working, and maybe it's to find solutions, but maybe it's not, right? Maybe it's to partner, maybe it's to be supportive. It's not necessarily that we're always going to be driving the solution. It could be done in a multitude of ways. So I hear what you're saying, but I'm not sure we need it in a vision statement versus somewhere else in the document. So I'm just on the fence about that. In regards to vibrant, I like the word dynamic, but if I think about what do we all ultimately want our economy to be, right? And I think dynamic, to me, that doesn't necessarily jump out as a really strong economy. You know, we all lived through the economic downturn, and we all know that we want a really strong economy. So when I think of vibrant, I think of strength, where when I think of dynamic, I don't necessarily think of a strong economy. So I don't know if there's another word that captures that. My worry is that dynamic doesn't necessarily capture the essence of strength, right? Like we need a strong, diverse economy, quite frankly. I think the reason Grand Rapids fared better than many other communities is because we have a diverse economy. We have a lot of strong, locally owned businesses, and we don't rise and fall on just one industry. I don't know if vibrant captures that, but I think when you look at any strong economy, especially local economies, typically it's because it's a diverse economy. So I don't know. That's just some more. I don't know what the best word is, quite frankly. That's just my thought on vibrant.
Well, I agree with Commissioner Jones about vibrant because I have recently been reading some commentary, and we mentioned that when we met with Mark the other day. But vibrant is too nebulous. What does that mean? Dynamic, I see that we are living in a dynamic global economy. We have peaks and troughs that we've never seen before, and they're happening fast. But maybe, to your point, Mayor, that what we're looking for is a healthy economy because we want to even challenge notions of growth. Growth for whom? What's equity? You know, because growth for the sake of growth isn't necessarily healthy. To some degree, we want to be sustainable, and we want to create neighborhoods that aren't driven by consumerism and material wants versus needs that everyone has. And to your point as well, Mayor, goes back to this economic gardening that we talked about years ago, that we need a diverse economy. So maybe that's a healthy economy.
Yeah. Healthy economy, safe community, and opportunity for equality.
So
How about robust?
robust.
Oh.
Anything that describes a positive economic outlook is what I'm looking for. Robust,
I like
prosperous,
robust.
healthy, vibrant. We
like
want a great
robust.
economy.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's what vibrant did for me, is I can recall constituents saying, you know, we want our business community to look vibrant like downtown. We want a vibrant business district in our neighborhoods. You know, people said that frequently, and so you can see vibrancy. And I think, you know, that's why vibrant works for me, but robust, I guess, has the same
I like
connotation.
robust.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at all of our planning, or many of the planning documents and amendments to the comprehensive plan, that word vibrant is mentioned in several plans as the aspirational future for our community. But robust works.
Can I just tell you that according to Merriam-Webster, robust is having or exhibiting strength or vigorous health, having or showing vigor, strength, or firmness.
Vigor. I like it.
Well,
That's
this is
bold.
This is great conversation. I'm being mindful of the time so that we have enough time on our other discussions, but I wanted to ask Commissioner Repart or Commissioner O'Connor if you have something that you would like to add.
I want to affirm making it more aspirational. Like, well, last year when we lined up, can we end systemic racism? We were all over the map because some of us are more cynical than others and more hopeful than others. But I do think that having some extremely, I don't really care about how necessarily how the nation judges us, but how our community judges us, I think, is what matters to me, whether or not they feel like we're hitting the mark in terms of equity and racial equity. And I have it in my notes several times today, because I went through the Real Center cohort, as have many people in this room, but I do think it's important to call out racial equity as a central thing, not to take away from the other advancements of equity and other identities that are struggling to gain equity. But what we learned in that Real Center cohort was things happen in a different way when you explicitly identify racial equity. And those are the lists that we're down on the list on, right? Whether it's welcoming or equitable economy, so.
Commissioner O'Connor, you have anything else other than the nice ad of robust? And Commissioner Moody, I know you shared some on values, but great. Yes?
So with that in mind, so you're taking this feedback and then you're going to come back to us with a different version. So as we're looking at that, I don't know, I'm sure there are plenty of examples out there of vision statements, but when I think of a vision statement, so in addition to it being aspirational, I think we should know if we ever attain the goal. And so somehow we need to set it up so that it isn't something we can attain tomorrow, but there's this vision of, okay, when we get there, we know that we've arrived. And so when I look at this, I'm not seeing that yet.
Right.
So as you're creating something new, think about that as well. And the lists keep coming back to me. I think to your point, we may or may not necessarily care about being on national lists, or we may.
Well,
because
sure,
the national lists are looking at the local data to determine where we fare on those lists. Sorry, I'm using fair. But just think about that. And it doesn't need to be a vision statement to say we're going to be number one on every national list in a positive light, but it should be something along those lines so that we'll know once we get to it, and then we just create a new one.
All right.
Can I have one more thing about that? And I agree, ultimately, we care deeply about our community and the people who live here. But with that said, if we're talking about retaining talent, retaining families, attracting talent, people compare us to other cities. Companies compare, if we're going to have a robust economy, I sit in meetings where companies are looking at Grand Rapids versus Chicago versus Atlanta versus Cincinnati. I talk to my mayor's millennial board, and they have job offers all over this country. And we need to make the case why Grand Rapids should be their home, right? So whether we want to put it in a vision statement or not, I personally would support that. We're being compared all the time nationally to other cities. And if we want to be the best of the best, we need to really specifically say that. And I think people locally are really proud of that. I think there are some lists we've made it on that people are proud of. There's others that we should all be mortified about. But it gives us something to strive for and recognize we need to improve.
I think that in terms of identifying metrics, though, we got to identify the ones that we want to improve.
Absolutely.
We don't get to pick their metrics, so we want to do good on their metrics as well, but how are we going to track our own progress?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
I
our
think-
values, the new values could be
Yeah.
where we land.
Exactly.
And Brad has a plan for that.
There you go.
Going from values to mission.
I was going to sound like Phil Jackson in the triangle offense and refer us back to the triangle that we had earlier, because that's how we get to the accountability in our values, is measuring ourselves, whether that is national lists or our local metrics, and we're going to talk more about that. So that there is a realization of measuring how close or how far we are from some of these aspirational things.
So could we say that Grand Rapids aspires to be a national model of, and then list some of these things?
Okay, we will take all of that into consideration, and as we draft another version, and I'll share it in our one-on-ones or two-on-one meetings.
Great. Well, thank you. I appreciate the feedback and the conversation. I think there's some excitement around kind of finalizing those values in that vision statement so that we can all start collectively, putting it on our wall and knowing that every day when we come in that's what we're all working to achieve and working for.
In the next version, we will not have two statements. It'll only be one.
Okay, so now we're going to move. I'm just a little behind, and so I'm going to frame up a few things, but really is now where we want to get into the meat about revisiting what should be the strategic priorities. Kind of, I think Scott or Brad had mentioned kind of the buckets that we're going to categorize our work and coalesce around. And so we're going to spend some time talking about those and how we've developed some draft outcome statements for what is it that we're looking to achieve for those strategic priorities, and then a discussion around some draft objectives to get some feedback there. So if you think back and you revert to that triangle, I'm always going to continue to emphasize we have not gotten to the point yet of offering metrics, right? We want to get clarity on objectives and some guidance around some strategies before we start diving into how are we going to measure to ensure that ultimately what we're doing will achieve those outcomes. So that really will be the next layer after today, that we move forward and kind of solidify the priorities and the objectives so that our outcome teams can really start diving into developing what would be some recommended metrics to continue to track our progress along those. But really we're going to take about 15 minutes per strategic priority. I know that seems like a short bit of time, but we only have until noon, so I'm going to try to keep us on task because we want to get through all 6 so that we can get your feedback on all of them. And so I'm just right now, very quickly, I'm going to condense and just do a high level of the 6, and then we'll move into actually addressing what has been developed in draft form around each of the 6 strategic priorities. So just to kind of revisit where we were from the December session and where we've landed around the large 6 kind of buckets of strategic priorities. We have economic vibrancy and affordability, health and environment, safe community, an engaged and connected community, governmental excellence, and mobility for all. So the blue box are some notes that speak to a few of the reasons why this list was developed. And so at the end of the last session in December, there was some conversation and there was discussion around combining health, safety, and environment. So we separated those out. I think that there was a lot of robust conversation and work that's happening around safe community, recognizing, as Brad said, safe is much broader than just fire and police. And a little bit of a concern that if we combine those together, the health and environment might take on a more shadowed role, and recognizing that we may not be able to fully invest as deeply as we may want with safe community if those ultimately were combined together. So maybe think about that as we go through it. I think the terminology that landed on some of the sheets when you ended were community trust and connectedness. So we've combined those together into the priority of engaged or connected community. And there was a lot of discussion, and so collaboration and customer service are values. Innovation was one that was up here on a sheet that we have put into a value. And again, just going back and remembering that the values are things that will be embedded across all of the objectives and all of the strategies and priorities that we have. So equity, I would like you to think about, right now we have it identified as a value. It is not identified as a separate standalone strategic priority, but as you will see in governmental excellence, there is an objective specific to equity, just to continue to reiterate kind of the embedding of equity throughout all of the work. But maybe keep that in the back of your mind. And then we added governmental excellence and mobility for all based on a lot of our top management feedback as recommendations to consider for the priorities. So what I would like to do is to go through all 6 so that you can review kind of how they've been organized and some of the objectives that have been identified for each of the priorities. And then we can leave time at the end that if you would like to have some feedback on, are these the right buckets? Does the terminology need to be changed? We can kind of circle back after we've had the opportunity to work through all 6. So with that, I just quickly also, Mark had mentioned that we have a large group of staff and they've been invited to participate today. And so I mentioned we have our executive strategy team and we have these outcome teams that will be developed. And so each of these are teams that are going to be singularly focused on the that strategic priority and developing the objectives and then really working to get into the metrics and some strategies. And so a lot of those staff are here today, and I really wanted to take the time to acknowledge their role in this process. We worked very hard to be diverse across departments, knowing that all of these should be cross-departmental work for people that have different expertise in different areas. And we kind of have this project team, or those that are kind of leading each of the outcome teams, and it's the role of we'll come together to ensure those values are embedded across the entire plan and kind of synthesize and have cohesiveness across the plan. So I just wanted to take a minute to highlight. You see a lot of our team members that are here today, and I'm super appreciative for all of the work that they're doing. And we're going to thoroughly launch on Monday after we've taken the feedback in from today and hit the ground running and get that work started so that we can turn around and come back with a draft preliminary strategic plan with you so that you will have the opportunity to review what some of those metrics are at that time. And so this is our last two items that we have. So I really, again, just wanted to acknowledge the work of that. And so my last reminder before I'm going to turn this off and we'll move over to the sheets are just kind of helping to stay focused. We've had the conversation about the values and vision, so we're really going to hone in on these two right now, knowing that our next phase after we get some more detail and feedback from you will then get into the metrics. And Scott is really going to help with this session. So I'm going to review what's up here in terms of what we've identified, and you all received, and you have the printout of kind of the very preliminary setup by each objective. So I'm going to turn this screen off so that it's not distracting. And we're going to start with the economic vibrancy, which I don't need to take that one down because that's for a later one. And so as you can see, just to orient yourself, because each of the 6 strategic priorities will be the same way. So here we have identified, this is the strategic priority, this is the bucket. So the first one we're going to talk about economic vibrancy and affordability. The draft outcome, we're welcoming feedback on this as well, trying to determine what is it that we're trying to accomplish, what do we want? So in this area, what do we want? We want residents, employers, and visitors want to come to and remain in the city of Grand Rapids. Right? So as we think about that as kind of the framework for what is it that we're trying to achieve, the objectives that we have come up with are, right, the first one is around housing. The second is around employment and wage growth for people. The third is specific to business and business development of all sizes. And then fourth is really on addressing doing business with the city. So I'm just going to review each of these, and then I'm going to allow Scott to facilitate taking your feedback down on these. So really here talking about supporting housing development and services to keep people in their homes. So it's talking about increased housing supply, wanting to call out, be specific around increased affordable housing supply, reducing the barriers to getting housing, maintaining our existing housing supply, helping people stay in their homes once they're there, and then piloting some displacement and a relocation policy. So this is really that key area of housing. And the second one, speaking to increasing employment, wage growth, and business ownership opportunities, right? We called out and thought here it was important enough to call out a focused efforts in our neighborhoods of focus, support education for people of color and first-generation students, and increase jobs that meet and exceed the ALICE wages. This is specific to employment in the community. Employment and that what will be addressed internal around city employment is under governmental excellence. So that's where we'll address that. The creation, growth, and retention of business, a call out specifically to creating and growing small business. I'm talking about increasing micro-local business enterprises in our city contracts and projects. And this is kind of supporting business attraction, growth, and retention, and then leveraging river restoration for economic growth as well. And the last bucket is make it easy for businesses to operate in and do business with the city. So this is starting and talking about our business support services, the creation of a small business development ombudsman, improve business opportunity awareness. Like those in our community don't understand, some don't understand that they have an opportunity to work with the city. So how can we enhance that so that there's more interest from a diverse pool of vendors that may want to work with the business, and then really making sure that everybody has access to our city goods, services, and contracts when we do that. So I'm going to welcome Scott to come up and help facilitate, and I can help jot down notes that are offered up.
All right, so a couple of things to keep in mind. You know, you just had the discussion about values, and you will see those values being embedded throughout. There was some, you know, wordsmithing on some of the things like the strategic priorities and vision. Those modifications, as far as, you know, words that are will end up being embedded throughout what it is that we'll present. Obviously, not enough time to do that at the moment, but think about those values in terms of what it is that is being presented to you. The big objective that we're after is confirmation. Make sure that the direction that commission is giving to the city employees is that you're heading in the right direction. If you see things that are inconsistent with the values that were discussed or inconsistent with feedback that you've gotten from your constituents, now's the time to, you know, note those. In addition, there may be some things that that, you know, may be insufficient that should be added in or considered for being added in. All this information is going to be taken, and those groups that were identified, it'll kind of become an assignment, and one of those values is accountability. So they will be the ones who will be following through to actualize what it is that's being presented here. Accountability is a two-way street. In order for them to do that, it's going to take some support, some direction from commissioners. So that's kind of how the pieces fit together. But we're looking for confirmation on the objectives, and again, a little bit of information feedback as far as whether you see some gaps in the in what's being presented as the strategies. Yes, Commissioner.
So when I look at these, I'd actually like to reverse the order and have objective number 4 to be the first one. Because when I think about economic vibrancy or a robust economic, what do we say, economic whatever, I think about, you know, making it easier for businesses to do business, and our city is a part of that, operate and do business in the city. The third objective, support the creation, growth, and retention of businesses, I think should be second. And the third should be number 2, increase employment, wage growth, and business ownership opportunities. And I'm actually not so sure about number 1 being a part of this group. And maybe it fits better to me with the
Just because you
environment.
reordered housing is what you're referring to as number?
Yeah,
Okay, thanks.
exactly. So, you know, that one seems like it would fit better with the environment, health and environment strategy, or strategic priority, excuse me, versus the economic vibrancy and affordability. I can see a little bit of why it was there, but it just seems like it would fit better with the environment, health and environment, because of people's ability to remain in their homes. I haven't digested all of the bullets under each of the categories
Okay.
yet, so I'll kind of read through that to see, you know, so far as I scanned it, it looked like there were some really good bullets for the actual objectives.
One other thing to keep in mind, and Commissioner Lanier just noted this, was that some of the things within here are going to impact some of the other objectives. You know, if you're talking about making it easy for folks to do business in the city, that's going to have an impact later on when we're talking about fiscal integrity within the organization, because that's an income tax related thing. So you'll see that scattered throughout. What happens here may impact other spots. What happens in other buckets may impact here as well. Other commissioners?
I certainly can affirm what Commissioner Lanier said about objective number 1. I don't want to lose it, but I do think maybe let's keep economic vibrancy as economic vibrancy alone. And I don't know what we do with the word affordable then, but while it's on this and we're discussing it, I think the one thing that I wanted to add to that objective number 1 is facilitate increased affordable housing supply at all levels. I think that the cities that have done affordable housing well have strategies for homeless, for 30% to 50% AMI, for 60, for 80, for 100 to 120. So I think that we ought to have the same kind of strategies for that. And we're not identifying targets for each, but I would love to see a target for each, because we know that we're 3,000 behind on the supply side. So we've got to make up and exceed So we need to have targets.
And a target speaks to what the measure is going to be, the metric, and so those will be developed and presented back
Right.
to commissioners.
A couple thoughts on objective number 3, which is now objective number 2.
Sorry.
Is, in terms of MLBE, I think that that's a great, I support that, but I do think that we need to have a conversation about the process and how we use that and what that looks like. I think that in order to increase the use of it, we need to change the way that we have it structured, as well as change the way that we shop it out in the community. And then under number 4 there, I think a big question for the city around the river restoration is who's going to get access to that $45 million investment? And so I liked adding the word leverage river restoration project for diverse economic growth. And then I just had one, that's all I had for this
Okay.
one.
Thank you. Mayor?
So I think those are all good points. And maybe under objective 3 now too, we've talked at length about how do we support locally owned businesses? And I know around this table, we just had a lengthy conversation about that, and we've also talked in the past about a local preference. I know MLBE attempts to get to that. I do think that this is an area ripe for reassessment.
Innovation, maybe.
And innovation. So I just kind of want to put an exclamation mark on that. That my goal also, in addition to increasing use of MLBEs, is to really support local businesses and make sure that we're supporting them in every possible way that we can, especially with local tax dollars. And then going back to the outcome for this section,
Okay.
I see the word visitors, but I don't really see anything specific under these objectives that targets how do we become a destination for visitors and increase tourism, which clearly has an economic impact on our local economy and small businesses and the ability for restaurants to be successful and other types. But I don't necessarily see anything specific, but yet that's in the objective. And so to me, it's just it's a question mark. Why is it there?
Right.
If it's really priority, it should be included in some type of objective.
And that's really good feedback because that speaks to the alignment of, between, the objectives and the strategies. So thanks.
And the only other thought I have, I could go either way on the housing affordability. What immediately came to mind is the recent survey that the chamber did that identified from over 600 businesses who responded to a survey, top priorities. And one of those that rose to the top is housing affordability for their employees. So I do see the connection with economic vibrancy, but I could go either way.
As far as whether it's here and the other?
Whether it's here or
Okay.
there, I think, like so many of these topics, they're intertwined.
Right.
And there's a synergy between all, mobility came up as an issue too from the Chamber's survey, so we know that that's related to economic vibrancy, but also to a whole host of other things like access to healthcare and access to other needs for families. So I'm on the fence. You can put it, it's important. I think the feedback is good. I agree with Kurt that it really needs to be affordable housing supply at all levels. But where it goes in the chart, I'm okay with.
Commissioner O'Connor?
Yeah, a few things. I agree in some sense around the affordability. I think affordability is more of an objective than a priority. That it's with all things housing related, it's an expense side and a revenue side conversation, and so affordability really only relates to being affordable based on how much money you make or what your income side is. So to say that affordability is a priority, it's a little misleading in the sense that I think if revenue goes up, the cost can go up, and I don't want to have the false sense that we're encouraging the stagnation or deflation of property values in the city either. I think that's not a lofty goal for the city to say, hey, we want to keep our housing growth at only 3% a year when other markets go up at 10% a year. That's not a goal we should strive for. We should strive to have incomes rise so that people can afford the property that matches the economy. In the housing objective 1, now objective 4. I think number 6 needs to come off. I don't think, again, that's a strategy. That's not an outcome like this. And reading through the remainder of the list, that's the only one where a policy-making decision was listed on here that we haven't even discussed as a body yet.
All right.
I think there needs to be, as we look across a couple of these, we talk about small businesses, we talk about, focus on local, but we're not, I think we have to have this priority or this strategy around utilizing our incentives differently then.
I'm sorry,
utilizing our incentives, right? Like a majority of the, like, if we want to really support both housing and business development, then we need to realign the vision of priorities around how do we, every time we give out a tax incentive to a very large business or a very large development, that's great. We need those projects, whether they're LIHTC or whether they're big brownfield projects. But we also have to have an intentional focus around, neighborhood redevelopment. We can't talk about neighborhoods and housing affordability when we only live in the boomer bust cycle of affordable housing tax credits or very large projects. So we need to make sure that whether it's CRP or TIF or brownfield, that we're making those tools available for small business development and for neighborhood business development and for neighborhood housing projects. And so I don't know how that gets worded in there, but the idea that if we're going to focus on small, then we need, or have a value statement around small, then we need to look at that. Yeah, that's it.
All right, very good. In the interest of time, again, we need to get through each of the different bucket areas here. So if there aren't any additional comments, would like to move on, but there is one from Commissioner Kelly.
Just one,
Okay.
and it has to do with this conversation about the affordable housing and the other side of the equation being living wages. So, perhaps we word this as affordable living. But at some point, we also have that in objective 2, so I'm open to that. But I think it's really about affordable living.
Okay, thanks.
Just one suggestion, and that is, in place of the word vibrancy is prosperity. Just food for thought, economic prosperity and affordability.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
And one other thought. It occurs to me that a lot of our economic incentives are based on how people view and if they want to come. We would describe it as want to come. And we need to start thinking about how do we become more aggressive in recruiting people to come. And I know we have partners that do that with the right way, but they're looking at regional recruitment, and we need to think about what do we do specifically to recruit for Grand Rapids and not just the region in general.
And that, is that more of a, is that more under objective 3, support the creation, growth, retention of businesses? Would that?
Yeah.
The old form.
Yes, it would be 3, then it's related to the
To
comment
4.
about incentives to support and attract businesses,
Yeah.
but we need a,
I couldn't agree more. To
Yeah.
your point, we have, it seems that we have a significant reliance upon our partners at Right Place. And the question becomes, what are we doing locally within city with our resources and our staff to attract businesses as well? So-
and not apart from them,
Apart- no,
collaboratively
yeah,
with them.
Right, in addition to.
All right, so health and environment has 6 different ones. Allison, you want to walk through real quick?
I'm going to try to keep us maybe on to 10 minutes. So health and environment, protecting and enhancing the physical, mental, and social health and well-being of all people in the environment. And I did just want to reiterate that the objectives don't have a priority ranking necessarily in terms of their listing. So if you still want to provide feedback that they should be changed, that's great. But from a strategic plan, they should all be seen kind of as the same level of importance. So mitigate and prepare for climate impacts with a couple of strategies that we've identified there. Objective 2, ensure equitable access to and use of safe green spaces and increase recreational activities. Again, some example strategies that would be identified there. This is collaborate with and support partners working to reduce health disparities in the community. Increase the safety of homes while decreasing health and utility cost burdens for low to moderate income residents. And this is one where I meant to speak to earlier. There are objectives that overlap each of these different strategic priority buckets. And so really, that's okay. It's just identifying where we think they best fit. And then the last three are protect and preserve our water resources and air quality, and minimize waste generation and promote waste diversion practices.
All right, so Commissioner reactions? Alignment with the values and also the conversations that you've had with your constituents. Does this mean full agreement?
No.
Commissioner Lanier, please.
These are really good. So two things. I'm struggling because I'm trying to be
Drum circle.
obedient, which was, we will talk about things that we think should be included as a strategic priority after we get through these. But I'm struggling because as I'm reading these, I feel like saying what I want to say. So I'm going to just not be obedient any longer. Oh, no, I have permission now. Now I'm obedient because I'm going to follow permission. So I actually think that there should be a strategic priority specific to eliminating disparities. And I think that within the elimination of disparities could be, these really challenging issues that we have, that we know we have, that quite frankly, we typically hide under other things, and then it allows us not to ever achieve them. So one that's coming to mind as I'm reading the health and environment is the lead issue. I see that it's on there somewhere, but lead should be so ginormous in everything that we're reading because of how it's impacting our community that I'm struggling with kind of reading it under a bullet that's under a bullet that's under a priority. So that's just one example. So I think we need to look at the elimination of disparities as a strategic priority, which then would kind of, even that housing one we were talking about last time, that would be a good one to put into that category. The lead could be put into that category. And then some of the health issues that we're seeing in specific zip codes and communities, unemployment could be in that category. So just all of these kind of big, hairy things that, need some attention could be addressed, so.
So I'm hearing confirmation on objectives, but where those objectives reside is, you'd like to see the additional.
Yeah, and how
Okay.
they're formatted too, yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you.
That even as I look at this, and I'm open to feedback, I like the addition of that as an objective and really capturing very specifically where the disparities exist and what we need to do. I mean, even looking at this list, we've known for decades that we have a lack of green space in our poorest neighborhoods. And there's a significant disparity even with green space. And we know there's a significant difference in tree canopy, which impacts air quality. And we know that there's a difference in some of the infrastructure investments we've made. I think we probably could pull out under each section, even under mobility. We know that there's some disparities in access to mobility options in certain neighborhoods. Not to throw a wrench in the structure, but, and maybe they could be included in multiple places under multiple objectives, but then really pulled out separately under a separate category. I'm not sure formatting-wise what that would look like, but whether you keep them.
Don't worry about that
Whether
either.
you keep them and then add them somewhere else, I'm supportive of either one. In looking at this list, though, one thing that I think is missing under Objective 5 with collaboration and support partners, I see the real specificity actually around impacts of inebriation in the Heartside neighborhood. But we also have significant needs around individuals struggling with mental health, and we have an opioid epidemic. And so I think if we really look at that objective, we're missing some key issues in our community. And granted, we have partners that are leaders in that space, but I do believe that we need to come alongside them and be a lot stronger partner, with the county and with our mental health providers and other nonprofits in town who are actively working on these issues.
And that speaks to the value of collaboration.
Let
Yes,
me acknowledge the comments made by both Commissioner Lanier and the mayor on the importance of emphasizing equity, and we were specifically talking about one of the ways. Can someone check on that?
They're on their way up the stairs, they're going up to get it to stop.
Okay. One of the ways we were specifically.
They're fixing the infrastructure.
Let's take a break. How about can we take a break, a 5-minute break?
Just keep knocking everything.
I don't think we'll get through everything.
Let's just, okay, let's
Done.
stop. All right.
I heard you.
So one of the ways we had talked about using the lens of equity as our value is, as we look at all the strategic priorities, applying the equity lens to them all, exactly what the mayor was saying. As we look at economic prosperity, look at the disproportionality of economic prosperity as we start to measure where the jobs are, where the unemployment rates are, et cetera. As we look at health and environment, start to look disaggregate the data, looking at the zip codes where the most lead-contaminated homes are and the results and outcomes in those areas. And the same as governmental excellence, looking at in terms of the workforce composition or the wages that are being paid across the workforce by different based on differences and et cetera. So that is a way to have the lens of equity applied to them all. My only concern is if we come up with a objective of equity, we would have to be very clear on, we would limit the things that we would look at on those, and it would not be all-encapturing as we are trying to do now, because we would say these are the things, the top whatever, that are most important. And what we're saying now, everything is important using the equity lens, and we want the metrics and evaluation of those outcomes on everything. And I have no problem identifying a specific focus for equity, but just the reality, we're limiting, or we're emphasizing some more than others, but we'll attempt, our goal is to make sure that we look at everything through the equity lens.
So I agree with that, city manager, and that's why I was really strategic in the words that I use and innovative in the words that I use, because I want it to be sustainable and people held accountable. So, so I said the elimination of disparities.
Right.
So it isn't an equity bucket, because equity then can be across every single thing that's here, but very specific, eliminate disparities. And then we talk about some of the disparities, and we know how we got there, and that's where the equity piece comes in. But I think this is really targeting some specific issues. Yeah, and I think that, they're challenging issues to address, but I think that there needs to be attention on those issues like never before.
And maybe a middle, I'm sorry,
No,
Commissioner.
no.
Maybe what we do is under each strategy, we add another objective specific to eliminating disparities within that strategy, right? Under economic prosperity, there's a specific objective focused on eliminating disparities that exist currently in our local economy. Under health and environment, we have a objective number 7, very explicit to eliminating disparities related to health and safe environments. Because some of these are not not specific at all to addressing the disparities that exist, right? They're citywide, like improving recycling, enhancing composting, zero waste pilot. So I wonder if then you can call it out very explicitly in an objective under every single category, because I do think there's unique needs under each category as it relates to disparate outcomes.
So good feedback, and I think that, take that as far as what gets back to commissioners for it. But in the interest of time, we do need to move forward with the other buckets. Okay,
This is important because I don't want the staff to go and do work that we're unclear. So what I'm hearing, I heard two thoughts. One, either come up with another objective, another
Strategic
strategic priority, I'm sorry, with limiting disparities. And then the other thought was to have that embedded as an objective within the current strategic priorities. So is there a preference by some than others? We've heard from a couple of the commissioners. I want to make sure we get a good sense from the others.
Rupert was gonna say something earlier.
Yeah, I mean, if I go back to Brad's triangle, we're making a 3 to 5 year strategic plan. So I think
trademark it,
that
Brad.
if you're right, City Manager Washington, if we create a new bucket, not everything's going to get in that bucket for this 3 to 5 year period. But what it does allow us to do is to say, during this 3 to 5 year period, here are the 5 things that we want to impact in terms of disparate outcomes. If we don't do that, then it all gets watered down. But if we focus on 5 or 3, then maybe in this 3 to 5 year period, we can actually accomplish some movement on those 3 to 5. So I don't know, to answer your question, I don't know whether it's a separate thing or underneath each, but I do think that we probably ought to pick a couple of them to try to really lean into, otherwise it'll get watered down.
Yeah, I agree that we need to pick some. I mean, I think that's inevitable that
Right.
and some will rise to the top if something happens and it's drawn to our attention. So I'd like to send it back to staff with those 2 possibilities and get a sense of how is it going to stay at the top of the list so that we are always looking at them and that we're open to whatever department, whatever situation. And yet, I want to stay open that, maybe we focus on 4 or 5 that are glaring, but we have to be ready to have staff constantly looking for those. So as we're looking at through our racial equity lens, that is right at the top too, because that's what's affecting people's daily lives.
all right. Okay, moving on to safe community then. Here we have just 3 objectives. Again, it was split out from the health from the previous discussion, so that it wouldn't get lost in the shuffle. So we have the 3 objectives. One is effectively respond to all emergencies, and you can see the other components of it within there. Provide proactive prevention to reduce crime and enhance community safety is the second objective. And then the third is to plan for and manage recovery services needed after emergency events. So those 3 big objectives.
And I just wanted to call your attention to the outcome statement. So all people feel safe in our community at all times. So again, still soliciting some feedback and responses from that. But big picture, these are some examples, but are we responding to emergencies? Are we trying to proactively prevent emergencies and proactively work on safety? And then are we also working on addressing recovery services? So after an emergency event, what are we doing? Those are kind of the 3 key buckets that we're working with.
I just had 2 brief things. One is, just a question is, there's nothing on here about the facilities needed to effectively respond to all emergencies. I know that there's some fire stations that need to be improved and moved around, training facilities, discussion around where our police department is located, whether or not that's the best thing. So I don't know if that's another bullet around, or if that's.
Right now, it's in governmental excellence where we speak to facilities holistically. So when we get there, we
Fine.
will, and same thing, staffing
Yeah.
is under governmental excellence to discuss staffing in all departments and services for the city there.
And then under objective 2, evidence-based crime reduction strategies called out, but I also think maybe adding to that jail diversion and community mental health. Those are the other 2 that we've been discussing with the department.
Under proactive.
Yeah.
Okay.
The other thing we've discussed, and I know the city attorney's office is actively working on this, but I wonder if we want to add something related to restorative justice.
So we also have one, I think it's an objective under In governmental excellence, there's a section just for equity, and that speaks to the criminal justice system
Okay.
in that section as well.
Okay.
So when we get to that, make sure it reflects your thoughts. Other commissioners?
I guess I want to just say that I like the collaborative problem-solving oriented process that includes residents' voice. I think that's the direction we're headed in, and I think that's really important for us to underscore. So I'm just glad that that's in there.
Good. All right, are we comfortable with this? All right.
Oh, well, we caught back up. So, this is good
Just
news.
like that.
It is 10:47. If you could try to plan, we have about a 10-minute break. There are some snacks, some coffee, juice, water. Use the restroom, but if you could try to be back at 10:58, 10-minute break, that would be fantastic. Thank you. up here momentarily. So feel free to get up once it arrives if you would like some.
They brought some more, I think, already.
Did they? Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Okay, well, thank you for sticking to time. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So for this next component, similar to the first one, we have 3 more strategic priorities that we'll walk through in a similar fashion. And then we'll have some time at the end, as stated, to kind of revisit some of this conversation and the question around, do we have the 6 strategic priorities identified accurately? And then we can continue some of the conversation around. Sorry. Says that it, so we will circle back and continue the conversation around, do we have the right 6 priorities? And we can continue to kind of finalize and get some more final thoughts on equity at that time. And so with that, to keep us on time, I'm still aiming for about 15 minutes per strategic priority. So the first one we'll start with now is engaged and connected community, with the draft outcome statement being, the city communicates proactively and transparently, and all community stakeholders are able to easily and effectively engage in city services.
Can I clap? I'm going to say amen, but.
So there are 5 objectives, again, with some sample strategies underneath. So the first objective is listed as to enhance communication within operations and with the public. Number 2, develop a community engagement strategy across all city programs and initiatives. Number 3, administer a citizen satisfaction survey and act on the results for service improvement. Number 4, engage stakeholders in an equitable manner and meet them where they are. And 5, elevate resident voice in city operations.
All right, so this topic had quite a bit of conversation back in December in the first commissioner meeting. So I'm hoping that the wording resonates well. We've already gotten some confirmation from Commissioner Linear on that. But others' thoughts?
I
Sure.
appreciated all. The one thing that I noticed was that there isn't a whole lot of like language translation and materials in other languages spelled out on those. And so more interpreted services, but communications in English and in Spanish, just making sure to call out language as a important factor for engagement.
Thank you.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, this is an example of where the lens of equity is embedded in the whole concept around the outcome. And so I just say that in light of our last conversation, if we were to create a separate priority, how we might pull things out to do that and not diminish what we're trying to accomplish within the specific objective.
And I should mention and add to that, because it is in governmental excellence if you saw it, but under the objective that is speaking directly to equity, one of the identified strategies right now is that all programs would be, in the data, would be broken down by demographics.
Yep.
Right, so that is something that is embedded everywhere in anything. Citizen satisfaction survey, that's broken down into, and that's an expectation by embedding equity as both a value, and then we call that out specifically right now under governmental excellence. But know that that is something, it's placed there with the expectation that that will happen everywhere.
Okay.
How would the survey get administered to the community? For
The
objective
community
3?
survey,
Yeah.
the citizen satisfaction survey?
Yeah.
We have not operationalized that. That would be new. We've looked at several, speaking of national comparison, several communities that use the same thing, and the survey administrator has the data, comparative data in other communities on key performance areas and engagement and satisfaction, and so we've not determined how we would go about doing that yet.
I think it's a good objective, but I think once you do figure out a way to get it out to the community, your feedback is going to be enormous. So I think that's going to be important to look at too. And as far as the improvement on that, that's going to be determined on what the survey says in terms of its satisfaction.
And I think that information will be used for future strategic planning sessions for commissioners. Commissioner Kelly?
Yeah, the last, number 2 on the last objective, educate residents about city services and plan development. For one thing, I think it also means educate city commissioners and staff, because things are rolled out sometimes and we are not made aware of
them.
At all, or educated about why we're doing that. I think about things like roundabouts, for example, and having to go out on my own and do a little research and attend a couple things. And then I was able to communicate with our residents why these make sense and how they can save lives and so on. So I think that education needs to be just paramount. I know Commissioner Lanier and I have talked about that many times. If we're going to do Vision Zero, if we're going to do anything, we need to, and we have. I mean, we've got our grants from MDOT, for example, around that, and we do the best. We've got billboards out, but we have to do it better somehow. And we certainly have to make sure that commissioners are aware of these things and have something that we can just pull right out of our folders and say, this is why we're doing that. And if we do that, if we want an engaged community, I think we're going to save a lot of headache if we have educational tools in front of them or easily available online and in other languages. So I don't know if it's through the website, it's through our communication staff, whatever, but I don't think we do enough around educating all of us.
Commissioner Kelly? I was just going to say, too, under, I think it's objective 1, it's a little more fully explained in your packet. We narrowed it for here, but that speaks around communications to the point you're talking about and ensuring that it's properly getting to commission and staff before it's being, so that everyone here is familiar with. So I think that's speaking directly to what you're talking about. But we can bolster that around the education.
I'm glad you clarified that, because to me, I was looking at that more like that, if we have I think about the helicopters that showed up and we had no idea. All of a sudden they're helicopters and our residents are calling us and saying they're shining into our bedrooms and where did these come from? And
They just had to started doing it.
yeah, and we never really got to the bottom of why that happened.
Helicopters
It
are
just-
showing up, or?
There's a lot of
Yeah.
finger pointing that
Yeah.
happened.
A lot of finger pointing and we were unaware. So that's a dramatic example, but it's a good one.
Good one.
It's illustrative.
Let me, I certainly hear the concerns of not only Commissioner Kelly, but several of you have mentioned the importance of making sure that, to the degree possible, that you are aware before your constituents are aware, because ultimately, when there's concerns, they contact you before us many times. And we don't want you to be unprepared and not be able to speak informatively about what the city is trying to do in those instances. So as Allison said earlier, I have been doing a couple of things. We've relaunched our communication policy to make sure that we have the appropriate vetting internally in the organization and awareness to you through our communications office on major issues. And also, as Allison indicated earlier, that first objective in making sure that on major citywide issues that we vet it internally, we make you aware as elected officials before your constituents are aware of those issues is our goal. There are times where, due to emergency circumstances, we will not be able to do that. And the police chief has made me keenly aware that media has a way of getting access to information real time, through whether it's scanning or their contacts in community, and there are just times we won't be able to do that. But if it's an education program, an engagement program that we know that we're about to launch and we have a long runway to do it, there's no reason why it should come as a surprise if it's a major citywide effort or something that's happening, a major effort in your ward. So we will work on that.
Well, and you already have, Mark. We appreciate the text that you send. And I really don't want to have a police scanner in my house.
So Allison, thank you for this. This is a priority. But I'm wondering if we could add potentially a bullet under objective 1, because I don't think the 3 bullets get to a significant concern of mine that I think is shared by some of my colleagues. That we need to look at all of the communication, especially written communication, that comes out of this entire organization. And it needs to be through the lens of customer service and respect and equity. Even when we are enforcing something, we can send a message in a way that is respectful and kind. And our written communication is not consistent. Sometimes it's not even consistent with our rules around making sure that the language we use is language that any resident could understand. Getting away from some of the bureaucratic speak that I think sometimes ends up in letters that are sent out. So I don't know how we phrase that, but there should be someone in customer service that is reviewing every single piece of communication that goes out and making sure that it's aligned with our values.
I could not agree more. I think that if we can review all communication for equity, clarity, and respect, we will have gone a long way.
All right, yes.
I'd just like to co-sign that. The education piece, I think, is essential in the written communication. And I think going back to our values, so I'm a values person, so you tell me this is what they are, I'm going to keep using them. But I think, we need to be innovative in how we're communicating. So, if we're sharing a message, I know it probably is required that we include whatever section of whatever law that we're enforcing in this letter and I'm not using enforcing for enforcement, so Eric, that's not for you, it's just the word that I'm using, so. But whatever it is that we're trying to communicate, we may sometimes be required to include the law, and that's okay. But then how do we take that information, and even with graphics, how do we embed something in whatever it is that we're communicating so that people can understand what it is we're trying to say? So for example, how do we get an excerpt of a water bill and put this here, or a tax bill and embed that in there and circle and give more details about what something means if that's what it is we're communicating to the broader audience. And I think, so education and written communication is essential.
All right, good feedback. Any other commissioners?
On the objective 5, it's just a thought. Commissioner Lanier and I did a listening tour, and in terms of educating the residents, I think sometimes it might be feasible for us as we get the information to be able to get it to the residents through a community gathering or community meeting. I think that might be something important because the residents are the ones who are going to be concerned about what it is that they don't know about the water bill, what it is they don't know about the city being in a position to give loans, or what it is they don't know about affordable housing. So some of that can be eliminated by commissioners going out into the community.
And the us you are speaking about were commissioners?
Correct.
Thank you.
And some city staff.
Okay, thank you. All right, good feedback. Ready to move on? All right, our next one is governmental excellence. And I'll take these down if you want to walk through real quick.
Okay, so governmental excellence, and all right, so the outcome statement now is a fiscally resilient government powered by high quality and knowledgeable staff, provided with the appropriate tools and resources to offer excellent, equitable, and innovative public service. And so the objectives that we have here are create and maintain fiscal sustainability, attract, train, and retain high-performing employees, so distinct from the one that was under the economic vibrancy. This is specific to our own staff here and working for the city. Objective 3, appropriate number and location of facilities to meet demands of operations and our changing population. So going back to Commissioner Rephart's comment earlier, this is where fire stations or police station and other facilities and the efficient use of those facilities would be held. Objective 4, resource allocation and major policy decisions made through equity lens. So this is where we tried to more fully embed an objective specific to equity that would talk and touch on some of the other areas, but also understanding that equity as a value would be embedded across all of the strategic priorities and objectives. So objective 5, secure data collection and storage, decision making and sharing with the community. So this is really that being led by data and ensuring it's being shared with the public, as well as that we are using it to make informed decisions. And then objective 6 was more specific around the master plan and update the master plan to enable smart growth. And again, keep in mind, the purpose of the strategic plan is 3 to 5 years of trying to highlight those areas to focus.
All right, Commissioner reactions?
I'll start. So under objective 2, was there any discussion about a goal related to diversifying our organization to reflect the community that we serve?
Yes. I think the thought was when you talk about reduced vacancy and turnover rates, that there would be the metrics that would speak about your employee staff. So it's not reflected in a strategy, I guess, here. But the idea then, thinking about back to embedding equity in all of them, that all of our staff would be broken down by demographics to continue to have the conversation around that. But I sense that maybe you would like something more specific called out.
Well, for me, that's a priority, that our organization reflects the community that we serve. So I mean, I don't know if we want to spell it out that specifically. And I know that we have strategies to get there, whether it's grow our own or, I mean, I appreciate the inclusion of an internship and apprentice program, which I think we desperately need to look at that as a potential resource to fill jobs. I don't know. I mean, I'll look to, you have an HR background. I'll look to you.
So I think, as Allison said, there are 2 areas. The 4th objective about the policy decisions through the equity lens that would include staffing, but also I see where it could be specifically called out to make sure we have a diverse workforce in objective 2. And so those are certainly things that we want to measure and monitor and make sure all departments are working on. So I think either specifically calling out an objective 2 or 4 would be appropriate.
Somewhere within this diverse workforce, I would appreciate that language added somewhere where it's appropriate, and I'll defer to you to make that determination.
Commissioner Kelly?
So this might be more of a question for the mayor and the manager than anything else, but I know that many of us were at the Urban League breakfast yesterday, and we learned about Mercy Health's evidence-based hiring, looking at skill set and character, and I don't know how that might fit in, but it sounds to me, after a brief conversation afterwards with you, Mayor, that this is something that many corporations are looking at, and perhaps...
We've already gone and...
So I don't know, I mean, that didn't pop out at me in this, but apparently we're
removing
doing
unconscious
that,
bias
yeah.
from hiring.
Yeah, I think what we need is perhaps something, just looking at a hiring process in general that would include looking at the time it takes us to hire people, as well as the process or any barriers that might be in place to cause any disparities, if there are any. So I certainly agree, and that strategy, we're part of the pilot, I believe, and I don't know how far along we are to begin establishing goals on it, but we certainly can look at incorporating that.
And Commissioner Lanier, you had your hand up a moment ago.
Yeah, I was just going to advocate again for strategic priority. That would be the elimination of disparities, and I think some of what I'm hearing would fall into that. I'm up to 8 different things now that could fall under that priority. Yeah.
All right. Others?
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts. I know that I've been banging this drum, but today is the day of racial healing. But under number 4, I do think that, whether it's disproportionate racialized outcomes or, I think that spelling that out explicitly it's important to me.
Within the judicial system, is that what you're?
Yeah, or,
Okay.
Somewhere else under objective 4.
Okay.
And then under objective 6, it says create a mixed density in downtown, and I would advocate for mixed use, density, and income in downtown, all 3 of those things for that master planning process.
Mixed use, okay. Got that, Alice?
Mixed use density and what?
Income.
Use density and income. I've also heard loud and clear from many of the staff that a technology needs assessment is well overdue.
All right.
That's putting it very
So I affirm
nicely.
that.
All right, a little silent on this side of the room. Any feedback?
The Gray Sweater Brothers.
Joe Gray had nothing.
All right, we're comfortable with this then? Awesome.
All right.
Moving on to the next one.
Which is the last for purposes of the 6 that we've started with, so then we can. So mobility for all, recognizing that there's been a lot of conversation around mobility and solutions for our community. So the draft outcome that we have right now is people and goods are able to easily move through the city via multiple modes of mobility. So 4 objectives. The first, talking about creating an accessible multimodal transportation experience. The second, pursue innovative 21st century mobility options and kind of looking to the future and what is it that we anticipate is coming to the community in the next 3 to 5 years. Objective 3, develop an effective customer responsive parking system. And think about, does this, when you talk about parking, does that fit specifically within mobility, or we had some conversation, does this fit around the facilities component of the governmental excellence one, the right facilities in the right places? And objective 4, connect the city's transportation network to the region and helping to leverage partnerships around transportation.
And like the other ones, you can see the embedment of the various values that were identified earlier.
I'm going to the description. It's interesting for some of the other ones, it says under strategic priority outcome, and then this one says description. I don't know if that's just a typo
I think
or.
that is, so it
Okay.
should say outcome. So I'll make that correction.
So with that statement, I feel like we need to add something related to affordability or what meets the needs of people's resources, like multiple modes of mobility based on the. I feel like we need multiple options for people based on their income and availability of funds and what they can afford. So if you live downtown, we need to make sure that, or if you work downtown and you don't have a car or you can't afford a parking ramp downtown, we need multiple options for people at different price points to meet the varying needs of people based on where they are in their life. And I just don't know if that outcome captures that. I get that people and goods need to move easily through the city. I mean, okay, but what are we trying to accomplish?
Right. It's embedded in the title for mobility for all. And so I think, because we could have just called it mobility, but the implication is exactly, Mayor, what you're talking about. We want everyone to be able to have access to mobility options and based on convenience, affordability, lifestyle designs, et cetera. And so I think what we can do is apply a little bit more of the equity lens or the affordability lens through our mobility strategy and see if there are other things that we can do to really emphasize that for all perspective that you were talking about.
That's a good point. And maybe just add modes of mobility for all. Maybe just add that into the sentence as well to highlight it, or I don't know.
Or
You
to
can
meet,
wordsmith
to meet varied needs. I think it is about people's needs, and they're going to be varied depending on location, their, affordability. To your point, that's why we are enhancing our bus stops. So, and the other thing, if I might add, since I've already
Please.
just jumped in here, is under Objective 3, educate the public on new technologies that are coming out and how to use them, whether it is the replacement of the street meters with new technology and making sure that we are ready. So we've educated, we've got our signs up, and we are good to go so that, again, it'll just prevent confusion.
All right, good.
couple things. One
Yes,
is,
sir.
I really like objective 2. I think it's very forward-thinking with the different objectives or the priorities that are listed around the car share program in particular. I like that. And also, should there be something in here that speaks to ongoing education or enlightenment around safety, in particular for those who are biking throughout the city? Is that something that we should weave?
And walking.
And walking, right?
Safety in general.
Safety in general, of
Yeah.
folks who are just, that's still we get calls pretty regularly in the second ward about safety and for
Yeah.
bikers, so.
So I know we went
And
through it
pedestrians.
a little quickly, just to respond, Commissioner Jones. So under safe community, there was a call out specifically for ensure people are safe as they move through the city. Thinking about that would be inclusive of traffic safety, as well as some of the conversation you had around sidewalk maintenance and
Gotcha.
some of those others, but about movement. So there is overlap where things kind of move between some of the different strategic priorities.
Thank you.
I was going to echo what Commissioner Jones said, but just
Okay.
talk more about pedestrians and street crossings and things like that. That's creating a system for, whether it's a walk to school route or it's a blinking light or a bump out, or how we make those determinations to ensure that. I think that's something that our communities have been asking for in a lot of regards, but to create a more formalized system to how we make those decisions so that people know how they can access those in the event that they want one or need one.
Okay, good.
And it might go without saying, but this is certainly going to be a budget issue. Crosswalks, for example, getting them painted at the beginning of the season, which will probably mean we have to contract out instead of doing it through the season and sometimes not finishing up till October and then it snows. Because we're hearing, with all these good changes that we're making, we create new problems, including crossing the street. So.
All right, good. Other commissioners?
I just want to affirm 3.3, if we're going to build parking, let's make sure that we can convert it later, once those autonomous vehicles get on the road and people start sharing cars and biking and riding buses.
Yeah, maybe this is connected to improve ridership on the Dash and Rapid. I really think we need to explore expansion of Dash to augment what's available by the Rapid in our city. I mean, with the Rapid being a multi-city system, there's only so much we can impact under that system because we have 5 other cities and then additional townships that are now buying into and utilizing the service. So to me, I think we need to look at that as a system and of course improve ridership. That needs to be done in partnership with the Rapid, but then what can we ultimately do to augment the services provided by the Rapid that are very specific to the city of Grand Rapids with the resources that we have?
Very good.
I do have a
Commissioner
quick
Lanier.
point, and it may speak to the point that the mayor made earlier about mobility for all, and the city manager's point about mobility for all. But I'm in this unique situation today where my vehicle is in the shop. I am driving my husband's vehicle today, but as I was wondering if I had the keys to his vehicle, because he's out of town last night, I was just thinking about, okay, how would I get to City Hall? How would I get kids to school and all of that? And as I was thinking about that, it just, it's the privilege of having access to transportation. And so I was set. I mean, we had all these options, including Commissioner Moody, although he didn't realize he was on the list.
Friends and family.
It worked out, right, friends and family. Who's from the 3rd ward that's going downtown? So as I'm reading this, I'm thinking about people who may not have the options that I have. And I don't see a whole lot that's fully reflective there. And I think it's cool that this mobility issue is faddish now. And so people who find it interesting to ride public transportation because it's the cool thing to do while they have their vehicles at home, and then they can post pictures about being on public transit is okay. But as we're considering mobility for all, I think, I would think that there would be a lot more coming out of this discussion as we're thinking about people who who only have one mode of transportation that they rely on. So I am meaning to beat a dead horse when I say I think we need to have a strategy about the elimination of disparities, because I think every single topic that we've talked about, there seem to be, even knowing that that's a value in what we've created here, which is really good work, there were some things that were missing. And most of those things missing were things tied to equity. And so there's no harm in that. I think that it just comes with the nature of doing the work, that when you have kind of this overarching goal here, as you're doing the work, everything kind of gets thrown in there. And I think it was Commissioner Rephart that said, I want to specifically talk about racial equity, because if you just talk about equity, it's easy for the box to get checked when one component of this is addressed. And so, I do want to talk again about having that as its own priority, and dumping a lot of these things that we've kind of talked about as some objectives within that, because I think it's important. We have had for, years, equity on our, as part of the language that we've used at this table. And we've talked about embedding it in so many different ways, but I don't feel as though we have reached the mark where we're consistently doing that. And that's through the format of having it embedded in other conversations. I think we need to spell it out, because if we really want to address this, it will be challenging, but I think it's worth the challenge to, if we say that this is a priority for us to pull it out and talk specifically about some goals that we can attack and address, while we also have equity embedded across, because I think where it has been embedded, and you can see that, that's great. But where it isn't specific enough, we will likely continue to have some of those woes after 5 years if we don't.
Okay. So I think it would be helpful, and Commissioner Lanier, you mentioned you had a list of 8 that you thought could specifically go in that category. If we have time, I think it would be good to just daylight some of those at this time, and whatever other things, feedback other commissioners think we should specifically focus on. Not that it would be the only thing, but these would be some of our priorities around equity.
So let's move in there in just a moment, but for the mobility conversation, is there anything else that commissioners haven't been able to speak to that they want to? Okay, good, very positive. Made it through an awful lot within a condensed time frame that we were worried about running over, actually. So we do have time for the other conversation.
And I think just to reiterate, the two approaches that I heard coming out of the session would be Commissioner Lanier talking about having perhaps a 7th strategic priority that would be specific to equity, and thinking about, we've tried to, as much as possible, have less than 6 objectives, because once you start getting too many, so thinking about that in light of if it were to become a strategic priority, what that might look like. Or the alternative approach was, and we saw it a little bit more specific under governmental excellence, where out of maybe the 4 to 5 objectives that are called out in each priority, should one of those objectives be solely dedicated to equity, to highlight and bring more attention and focus to equity within each of the strategic priorities.
So I'm interested in that, some of the issues on the 7th priority might look like.
So here's kind of the notes that I've taken. Housing, and without any definition or detail behind it. I think, it came up through our discussions today. So housing, led specifically, unemployment/wages, transportation/mobility. Number 5 is health and well-being. 6 is opportunity zones, and perhaps that could be an easy one, Allison, to extract out because it's, if you're trying to keep it to 6. Workforce representation, city workforce representation. And then the decriminalization of laws, because I know in years past we've talked about, what laws and the title is Elimination of Disparities. So what laws are impacting specific categories of people in ways that it isn't in others? And so I think the city attorney has that as a goal to take a look at the data to see how we are looking there.
Right, anyone else?
They're right on time.
Any other feedback on? So we'll take a look and see how we could look at that approach and as well as continue. I think we may be looking at something that's not either or, it's and continue to look at the lens of the other priorities through the equitable, disaggregated lens. And these may be things that we highlight out of that and emphasize these other things. I'm not sure, but we'll certainly take a look and see if we can place more emphasis on some of these other areas.
A couple of the commissioners haven't spoken too much to the different approaches. Would you like to share whether you have thoughts of either? Okay. Okay. My only other, I guess, follow-up on this item is just to circle back and on the 6 strategic priorities that were shared with the consideration of a 7th. Do you have any feedback on the buckets, the priorities? And if you feel those are the ones that you want to see and feel solid behind?
So you're talking about the list that Commissioner Lanier, I would just.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, just the 6, the
Just
one
the
that's about
6,
economic
okay, sure.
mobility, health and
Okay.
environment, safe community. I didn't know if there was any additional feedback now that we've reviewed all 6 of them. If you had any thoughts that you wanted to share reflecting back on kind of the big picture of the 6.
I personally think they capture the priorities, and I think they are all, as I said earlier, intertwined, so I think it's a real comprehensive approach. And I think it captures the feedback you heard from us at our last session.
Yeah, I will say that when I read these over, when we were emailed these, I was impressed that it felt like staff had really been listening to the community and to us and captured a lot of this. I mean, we're not going to get everything, and we may have new challenges that come out of even the government shutdown that we aren't aware of, but I think this is a great start.
Well, on behalf of the team, I'll say thank you. I know that has really been the team's focus, is to thoroughly take back the feedback from our first session, and that was really valuable. So appreciate the feedback shared today. I just have a couple closing slides, and then I'll turn it over to Mark so that he can conclude our session. If there's any other final comments or feedback from the commissioners, I would welcome that as well. But I think I only have 2 slides in conclusion, just to put it into picture from kind of more of a short-term time frame of where we're working and how we're working, and then more of a long-term perspective. And so this is something that Brad really helped put together, which I very much appreciate. You can see we started with December 4th and how we started with the commission, and we worked through with top management and an executive. So here in January, we've been doing some more synthesizing. Obviously, those that are circled are specific to city commission timeframes. And so you can see we're going to be working on the 30th. Will actually be a digital community update where Mark will be working on some things, I think, with the mayor around our strategic plan. Our outcome teams are really going to hit the ground running on Monday, and we'll be synthesizing all of this feedback this week so that we can start to get into the details of identifying some specific strategies and some metrics to align with, and perhaps revising some of the objectives with some of the feedback that we heard today. And so we'll continue to work through that with our outcome teams and the executive team. And the goal now is that at the February 26th City Commission meeting, that we will come back with a draft preliminary strategic plan to solicit some additional feedback and conversation around, to make sure that we're still continuing in the light of the vision that you have and with your feedback. And then really in March, we'll be kind of synthesizing and finalizing that plan with the goal ultimately at the end of March on the 26th to come back and present the preliminary strategic plan. And so here you'll notice there's been a little bit of a change. We're talking about it as a preliminary strategic plan because we really want to, in light of kind of the long-term plan, know that this is a living and breathing document. You've heard some people refer to it that way, and that's really the way that we are approaching it, right? We are working under a condensed timeline right now to be working alongside of our fiscal plan, but there's a recognition that we're going to, even after kind of this first year and we get our feet wet and we continue to move, that we want to come back and look at, are there some amendments that need to be made next year, maybe some revisions after we've been able to work through it. But the cadence is really that we would get to the point where the strategic plan is completed prior to the fiscal plan, and that we would have time to then really work through kind of that implementation of the plan and ensuring that all staff feel very comfortable with the plan. We offer some trainings, probably some things specific to the values, and really kind of implementing more of a performance management tied to the strategic plan and how that will work in concert with the fiscal plan. And then really recognizing that it's a 3 to 5 year plan, and we want to start a year in advance to make sure that we're ahead of the curve. So knowing that, kind of later down the road, whether that's 2022 or 2023, that we'll revisit with what we've learned, how we've been operating, understanding the performance and how we've been doing for the plan, right? The accountability part, and coming back to you on an annual basis, essentially with a scorecard, right? So we can identify, here's where we're performing well, here's where we still have some work to do, to highlight that, to be able to communicate it with you and then with the public after that point in time. So trying to be thoughtful and deliberate about the recognition that implementing a plan takes a long time. Somebody made the comment, I can't remember if it was Scott or Brad, but right, it's not the writing of the plan, it's actually the implementation and the management of the plan is a lot of the real work. And so I've appreciated Mark's leadership on this and helping to push our teams in that direction so that we can work more strategically and help with some prioritization. So I think that is all that I have, and I'm going to turn it over to Mark to share, and if anybody else or Scott, anyone else has any comments.
I have a quick question, I think, for you, Allison.
Yes.
So then, or maybe it is for you, Mark. So then, will this plan eliminate other plans that we're using? And, we, last budget cycle, we talked about the, now I'm forgetting what it's called now.
Transformation. But that's okay.
Transformation plan.
Right.
Because we've been talking about the strategic plan and sustainability plan. So, and I know when we met in December, we kind of talked about the various plans that we have and just trying to figure out how does this fit in with that.
So from those operational plans, this builds upon those, and so I won't be referring back to transformational or sustainability plan. This is the plan operationally. All of the other plans that exist from a land use, obviously, and master plan amendments, those will exist, but operationally, this builds upon the legacy of those, and this is what we will be referring to in terms of our alignment of our organization moving forward.
Can I add to that? I appreciate you asking that question, and I'm glad to see that we have a more concise strategic plan in front of us. My experience with the other plans is, having 160 value streams, that word that was so often used. I think it was very unwieldy and difficult to even measure success, quite frankly, at times. So I'm glad that those are still, we have that foundation to build on, but we're really looking at something much more concise and clear with measurable outcomes under the priorities that we have set. So I appreciate this plan and how clear it is. And I think it'll be much easier to communicate to the public. My question and follow-up in thinking about planning and timeline and, time that all of us will be together over the next several months, have we thought through the plan for finalizing this and then the budget plan? And do we have some days and times that we've set aside on the commissioners' calendars
For
to lead into budget?
So I'll start with this process first. So I started the meeting emphasizing that my intent was to not carve any more work sessions for this, but to use our normally scheduled commission meetings to continue to finalize our strategic plan. And I wanted to get feedback on that, because if we need to carve out more time to do it, I'm more than happy to, but I think we are far enough down the road where we may not need 4-hour chunks of time to do that. And let me test that and make sure that there's agreement around that.
Yeah, I don't think it needs to be 4 hours, but I think it would be good to kind of come back in this type of a setting, just to kind of roll it out. Yeah.
On our commission
Or Cal.
days.
Yeah, it could be,
Yeah.
I just find discussions like this that may take more time than we've planned better, off week than trying to cram it into what can become a really, really busy, hectic day. And then we're rushing through discussions that, quite frankly, need us to slow down and
Okay.
spend time on. So
Okay.
I'd rather have it on an off week just so that we can digest it and respond. And if we get done early, then we can go have a party, but.
Okay.
I'd prefer.
All right. And I just want to be sensitive to that, because I was trying to be as efficient with your calendars and time as need be. So,
Commission day, yeah, I'm here all day, just like knock it out. It's gonna be a long day anyway. I'd rather sit here in the afternoon and, again, I'm respectful of the setting and the desire to have the space to do it. It doesn't need to be at Cal, but
Yeah.
do it on Tuesday, after 2:00 or 1:30 or whenever our last committee meeting's over, and just get it done.
And maybe it can even be, based on timeline, maybe it can even be embedded into our first budget session as well. Maybe this could be the start, or
well, then that was going to get, we really need to get this adopted before,
Okay.
because the recommendations we're making on the budget, to the degree possible, will, the work, staff has already done the work, but now, to the degree possible, we want to align at least the final recommendations, and it won't all be aligned as part of the budget process. So that is the reason why we had the end of March as the target for at least firming up our preliminary strategic plan. Regarding the budget process, I think we've landed on the dates, and I'm looking to Jeff to confirm if you want to
Okay.
clarify
Is it already on
that,
our
please.
schedules?
Yeah, so we plan to release that last meeting in April. I think it's the 24th or 25th. If someone has a calendar open, with that date, it'll get released, and then we're only going to have a couple weeks after that to finally get it to public hearing and adoption, and early schedule in May this year. So there'll be some probably hectic weeks. We'll have to free up some time in your calendars.
Now, it'll take however long it takes, but we're trying for May. That's an earlier date. That was based on comptroller's assessment, but it'll take as long as it takes.
So to Commissioner O'Connor's point about an afternoon on a commission day, I think that's better than during Cal. So I'd agree with that, but still the off weeks are even better, because I think it allows for more time. But, if it won't require a whole bunch of time, that afternoon is good. As long as it's not during the time when we're scheduled for something else.
Okay,
Yeah, and
okay.
that's the issue is, we have to go and have an executive session and then we talk for 10 minutes about something we should
Right.
quite frankly talk an hour about, or 2 hours.
Okay, so we will look for dedicated time either on a commission day, and if we cannot carve out that time, then we'll find a dedicated time outside of a commission day, but that'll be our priority will be to look at what we can get done at a special session on a day that we don't have a heavy agenda.
Good.
Okay, well, thank you for your feedback again. This is very helpful. I appreciate the level of engagement, appreciate your candor. But I also want to thank the staff for all the work that they have done. So will you join me in commending the staff for all of their work that they have done and the work that they will do? Because this is not, I think we're about halfway in my assessment, but the heavy lifting is really going to start when we start looking at the performance metrics. So, again, my appreciation, and I want to thank, again, Scott and Allison for their facilitation today. They have done a wonderful job in helping us get to that point, to this point, and we look forward to seeing you next week, I guess, at our next commission meeting. Yep,
All right.
thank you.
Thank you. Well, and I would say, I'll add my thanks to our city manager.
All right,
This has been an impressive process.
thank you, thank you,
Yes.
thank you.